I was forced to quit my job to become a stay-at-home mom, but my Nil thinks I'm failing as a parent anyway. You ever feel like no matter what you do, someone's always there to tell you you're not doing it right? That's basically my life right now. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my adult life, I was career-focused. I loved my job in marketing, I was good at it, and I never imagined myself becoming a stay-at-home mom. But here I am, forced to quit my job and stay home full-time with my son, Liam, who's now 2. It wasn't my choice, but somehow I got pushed into it. And even now, with all the sacrifices I've made, my NIL, Sharon, still thinks I'm failing. Every single day. Let me introduce you to the people in my life so you can understand how I got here. First, there's my husband Jake. He's 35, and we've been married for 5 years. He's a good guy, really, and I love him, but his relationship with his mom has always been a bit complicated. He's the type of son who calls his mom almost every day, shares way too much about our personal lives, and values her opinion more than he'd probably ever admit. Sharon is in her mid-60s, retired, and seems to have made it her mission to remind me of all the ways I'm falling short as a mother and wife. She was a stay-at-home mom herself and takes every opportunity to tell me how it's the right way to raise a child. Jake and I had our son, Liam, 2 years ago, and he's the love of my life. He's an active, curious toddler with endless energy. Honestly, he keeps me on my toes. But being a stay-at-home mom was never part of the plan for me. Before Liam, I worked in marketing for a tech company. I loved my job. I was climbing the ladder, managing major clients, and had big plans for my future. I even had a marketing blog on the side that was starting to gain traction. My career was a huge part of who I was, and I thrived on the challenges and opportunities it brought me. When I first got pregnant with Liam, I fully intended to go back to work after maternity leave. Jake and I had discussed it, and he was supportive. We planned to find a daycare or maybe even hire a nanny. I never saw myself as the stay-at-home mom type, and neither did Jake, or so I thought. But then, as my pregnancy progressed, things started to change, and a lot of that had to do with Sharon. Sharon was thrilled when she found out I was pregnant, and I genuinely thought her excitement was a good thing at first. She was constantly checking in, offering advice, and even showing up with gifts for the baby. I didn't mind at first. It was nice to feel supported. But slowly her advice started to feel less like suggestions and more like expectations. She kept saying things like, "You won't want to leave him once he's born." And I stayed home with Jake, and it was the best decision I ever made. There was always this knowing tone in her voice, as if she already knew I'd cave and become a stay-at-home mom, just like her. I didn't take it seriously at first. I brushed it off because Jake and I had a plan. We both agreed I'd take maternity leave, then go back to work. We even toured a few daycares to get a sense of what the options were. Everything was set, but Sharon's comments never stopped. Every family dinner, every casual phone call, every random visit, she'd find a way to slip in some remark about how important it was for a mother to be with her child in the early years. And it wasn't just random, it was constant. She'd talk about how hard it would be for me to leave Liam at daycare, how it might affect his development, and how I'd be missing out on the most important moments of his life. At first, Jake just nodded along to his mom's comments, and I assumed he was humoring her. But the closer we got to my due date, the more I noticed his opinion shifting. One night, when I was about 8 months pregnant, he casually said, "Babe, do you think you'll really be ready to go back to work? I mean, Liam will only be a few months old." I remember feeling blindsided by the question. We'd already talked about it a dozen times, but suddenly, Jake was starting to sound a lot like Sharon. After Liam was born, things only got worse. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and trying to figure out how to keep a tiny human alive. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and completely out of my depth. But in the back of my mind, I was always counting down the days until I could return to work. I thought once the chaos of the newborn stage settled, things would go back to normal. But Sharon wasn't about to let that happen. As soon as the newborn fog started to lift, Sharon began visiting more frequently, under the guise of helping out. She'd bring meals, which was nice, don't get me wrong, but it always came with a side of judgment. "I don't know how you're going to juggle all this and work," she'd say as she folded Liam's laundry. Or, "I just can't imagine not being home with my baby. It's the most precious time, you know?" And suddenly, those little comments that used to roll off my back started to feel like daggers. They weren't just comments, they were criticisms of the decision Jake and I had already made. To make matters worse, Jake started echoing his mom's opinions. One night, as we were lying in bed, he said, "Maybe it would be better for Liam if you stayed home for the first couple of years. My mom thinks it's really important for a baby to have his mother around during that time." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jake had never been the kind of guy who thought traditional gender roles were important, but suddenly, he was pushing me to give up my career. I told him we had already made a decision and that I wasn't going to change my mind just because his mom thought it was a good idea. But the pressure didn't stop. Every time Sharon came over, it was the same story. You know, babies grow up so fast. You won't want to miss these moments, she'd say. Or you're so lucky you don't have to work. Some mothers don't have that choice. I tried to stand my ground. I tried to remind myself that going back to work was the right decision for me and for our family. But the more Sharon pushed, the more I started to doubt myself. Eventually, I gave in. I didn't want to, but between the constant pressure from Sharon and Jake's sudden change of heart, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I remember the day I handed in my resignation. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I was walking away from a huge part of myself. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd go back to work once Liam was a little older. But deep down, I knew the truth. Once you leave, it's hard to get back to where you were. After I quit, the reality of being a stay-at-home mom hit me hard. Don't get me wrong, I love Liam more than anything, and I'm grateful to have time with him. But I wasn't prepared for the isolation. Before, I had a job that made me feel fulfilled, a career that gave me a sense of purpose. Now I was home all day with a baby, and the days just blurred together. I felt like my world had shrunk down to the size of our living room. Jake was still working long hours, and when he got home, he'd be exhausted. We'd have dinner, watch a little TV, and go to bed. I didn't have anything interesting to say anymore because my days were all the same: diapers, feedings, naps, repeat. And then there was Sharon. With me home full-time, it was like she felt entitled to critique every aspect of my life. She'd drop by unannounced, usually when I was in the middle of something, and immediately start offering her advice. It wasn't even advice, really. It was more like a constant stream of passive-aggressive comments about how I wasn't doing things the way she would have. Oh, you're using disposable diapers? I always use cloth. It's so much better for the environment. Or I noticed the laundry's piling up. When I was home with Jake, I made sure to do a load every day so it never got out of hand. It didn't matter what I did. There was always something I could be doing better, according to Sharon. What made it worse was that Jake never stepped in to defend me. Whenever I'd bring it up to him later, he'd just shrug and say, "She's just trying to help. She doesn't mean anything by it." But it didn't feel like help. It felt like I was constantly being judged, like I was failing at this stay-at-home mom thing, even though I never wanted it in the first place. The pressure was relentless, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was letting everyone down. On top of that, social media became a constant reminder that other moms seemed to be doing it better than me. I know it's not real life, but when you're in the thick of it, it's hard not to compare. I'd scroll through Instagram and see these picture-perfect moms with their clean houses, their happy kids, and their organic meals, and I'd wonder what I was doing wrong. My house was always a mess, Liam was constantly throwing tantrums, and I could barely manage to cook dinner most nights, let alone something healthy. It felt like everywhere I looked, there was another reminder that I wasn't measuring up. The breaking point came one night after Sharon had come over for dinner. She had spent the entire evening critiquing how I was feeding Liam, the state of the house, and even how I looked. By the time she left, I was on edge, just waiting for Jake to say something supportive. But all he said was, "She's just trying to help. You know how she is." That's when I snapped. I told him I was tired of his mom's constant criticism, that I was doing the best I could, but nothing was ever good enough for her. Jake just looked at me like I was overreacting. He said, "She doesn't mean anything by it, like that was supposed to make it all better." We ended up having a huge fight that night. It felt like Jake just didn't understand how much his mom's words were affecting me. Or maybe he didn't want to. Either way, I felt completely alone in it. After that, things started to spiral. The house was always a mess, I was constantly behind on laundry, and Liam was getting into his toddler phase, which made everything harder. I was exhausted all the time, and every day felt like a struggle just to get through. I'd wake up in the morning, already dreading the day ahead, knowing that no matter how hard I tried, it wouldn't be enough for Sharon or Jake. Then came the panic attack. Sharon had come over unannounced again, and I was already having a rough day. Liam had been fussy all morning, the house was a disaster, and I hadn't slept well the night before. She walked in and immediately started commenting on how I should be getting Liam on a stricter schedule, how I should have made my own baby food instead of buying it, and on and on. I tried to smile through it, but inside I was falling apart. As soon as she left, I locked myself in the bathroom and just started crying. My chest felt tight, my heart was racing, and for a minute, I thought I was having a heart attack. But then I realized it was a panic attack. It was terrifying. I had never experienced anything like that before, and I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of everyone's expectations, Jake's, Sharon's, even my own. I had been holding it all together for so long, pretending like I was fine, but I wasn't. I was completely burnt out and I didn't know how to fix it. That's when I decided I needed help. I made an appointment with a therapist because I knew I couldn't keep going like this. I needed to talk to someone to get it all out in the open because I felt like I was drowning. Seeing a therapist was the best decision I could have made. For the first time, I had someone who wasn't judging me, who wasn't telling me how to be a better mom. She just listened. I told her about Sharon, about Jake, about how I felt like I was constantly failing. And then she asked me something that really hit me. What do you want out of motherhood? I didn't have an answer. I had been so caught up in trying to meet everyone else's expectations that I hadn't even thought about what I wanted. It was a wake-up call. Around that time, I also had a long talk with my own mom. She's the opposite of Sharon. She worked full-time when I was growing up. And while our house wasn't always spotless, she managed to balance everything in a way that worked for her. When I told her about everything that had been going on, she listened quietly and then said, "You're not failing. You're doing your best. And that's enough." It was exactly what I needed to hear. I had been so focused on trying to live up to Sharon's standards that I forgot I didn't have to. I was allowed to set my own standards for what kind of mom I wanted to be. That conversation with my mom gave me the push I needed to start reclaiming a little piece of myself. I decided to dip my toes back into the working world, even if just in a small way. I found a freelance marketing gig online, nothing too big, just a few hours a week, but it felt like a lifeline. For the first time in months, I felt excited about something. But when I told Jake about it, the old arguments came flooding back. He asked if I was sure I could handle with Liam, and even though I tried to assure him I could feel the doubt creeping back in. I ended up turning down the job before I even started. The guilt was just too much. Even though I knew I needed something for myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was letting Liam down by not being 100% focused on him. Sharon's voice was always in the back of my mind, reminding me that a good mother is always there for her child. I felt trapped between wanting to be the best mom I could be and needing to hold on to some part of myself. It wasn't like I didn't want to be there for Liam, of course I did, but there was this constant pressure to be everything. The perfect mother, the perfect wife, the perfect homemaker, and it was suffocating. I didn't know how much more of it I could take. Things came to a head a few months later. Sharon came over unannounced again, as usual, and started her usual routine of picking apart everything I was doing. I don't even remember what set me off, but something inside me snapped that day. Maybe it was the way she looked at the pile of laundry like it was some sort of personal insult, or maybe it was just the fact that I was tired of feeling like a failure. But for the first time, I decided I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Sharon, I appreciate that you want to help, but your constant criticism is making me feel like I'm not good enough. I'm doing my best, and I need you to respect that." She looked stunned, like she couldn't believe I was standing up to her. For a second, I thought she might lash out or get defensive, but instead she just mumbled something about only trying to give advice and then left. I couldn't believe it. I had finally stood up to Sharon, and she didn't fight back. Part of me felt relieved, but another part of me was just tired. Tired of having to defend myself, tired of always feeling like I was in the wrong. Still, it was a small victory, and I clung to it. That moment gave me the push I needed to start setting more boundaries. After that, I told Jake that if his mom wanted to visit, she needed to call first. No more unannounced drop-ins where she could judge the state of my house or how I was doing things. I needed space. Jake wasn't thrilled about it at first, but I stood my ground. For the first time in a long time, I was putting myself and my mental health first. It wasn't easy, and I could tell that Jake didn't entirely understand why I was being so firm about it. But at that point, I didn't care. I was done trying to meet Sharon's impossible standards. Once I set those boundaries, things started to change. Sharon still made her comments here and there, but they didn't have the same power over me anymore. I had stopped giving her permission to make me feel small. It's funny how something as simple as setting boundaries can change everything. I was still overwhelmed with the day-to-day responsibilities of being a stay-at-home mom, but at least I wasn't dealing with the added pressure of Sharon's constant presence. I began to feel a little more in control, like maybe I wasn't failing after all. Maybe I was just doing the best I could, and maybe that was enough. At the same time, I started picking up more freelance work. They were small projects at first, just a few hours here and there, but it was something. It reminded me that I was still capable of doing more than just changing diapers and cleaning up after Liam. I was still me, even if it felt like I had lost sight of that for a while. Those few hours of work each week gave me a sense of purpose outside of motherhood, and I clung to that. I needed it more than I had realized. I needed to feel like I was contributing to something beyond the walls of our house. But the guilt didn't completely go away. Every time I sat down to work, I felt like I was somehow taking time away from Liam. I'd see moms on Instagram or hear about friends who were throwing themselves completely into motherhood, and I'd wonder if I was doing something wrong by wanting more. Shouldn't I be happy just being a stay-at-home mom? Why couldn't I be content with that? But the truth is, I wasn't. I loved Liam, and I loved being his mom, but I needed more. I needed something for me. And that's something I've come to realize is okay. It doesn't make me a bad mom, it just makes me human. There were still rough days though, days where I felt like I was barely keeping my head above water. I'd look around the house and see all the things that still needed to be done. The laundry, the dishes, the toys scattered everywhere, and it would feel like too much. I'd feel that familiar weight of inadequacy creeping back in, whispering that I wasn't doing enough, that I wasn't good enough. But then I'd remind myself that no one can do it all. Not Sharon, not those moms on Instagram, not anyone. We're all just doing our best, and sometimes that has to be enough. One of the hardest things I've had to learn is that it's okay to ask for help. For the longest time, I felt like I had to do everything on my own. I had to be the perfect mom, the perfect wife, the perfect homemaker, and if I couldn't, then I was failing. But that's not true. Asking for help doesn't mean you're weak or that you're failing. It means you're human. So I started asking Jake to help out more with Liam. I started reaching out to friends when I was having a tough day. And you know what? It made a difference. It didn't fix everything, but it helped. Jake and I had another long talk about his mom a few weeks after I set the boundaries. I told him that I needed him to stand up for me more, that it wasn't just about Sharon's comments, but about feeling like he wasn't supporting me when I needed it the most. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was necessary. Jake listened, really listened for the first time in a long time. He didn't try to defend his mom this time. He just acknowledged how much her criticism had been affecting me. That alone made a world of difference. Knowing that he was finally on my side gave me a sense of relief I didn't even realize I needed. Sharon didn't exactly change overnight though. She still pushed back against the boundaries I set, still tried to offer her unsolicited advice when she thought I wasn't doing something the right way. But the difference now was that I didn't let it get to me as much. I'd nod, smile, and let her words roll off my back. I wasn't looking for her approval anymore. I was starting to trust my own instincts as a mom, and that felt good. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing okay, even if Sharon didn't think so. As Liam started hitting more milestones, learning to walk, saying his first words, it hit me how fast time was passing. I realized that these moments with him were fleeting, and that I didn't want to spend them constantly worrying about what other people thought of my parenting. I didn't want to look back and remember how much stress and pressure I felt during these precious years, so I made a conscious decision to let go of the guilt. I was going to focus on being present with Liam, on enjoying the little moments with him instead of worrying about whether I was doing it right. Letting go of that guilt was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but it was also one of the most freeing. I started to realize that motherhood doesn't have to look a certain way. There's no one right way to be a mom, despite what Sharon or social media might have you believe. Some moms thrive as stay-at-home parents, and that's great. But some of us need more, and that's okay too. I started to feel more confident in the choices I was making for myself and for Liam. I didn't need anyone else's approval, not Sharon's, not even Jake's, to know that I was doing what was best for us. That's not to say I don't still struggle with it. There are days when the self-doubt creeps back in, when I wonder if I'm really doing enough, if I'm being the kind of mom Liam deserves, but I've learned to be kinder to myself on those days. I remind myself that I'm doing the best I can. And that's all anyone can ask for. Motherhood is hard. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes it feels impossible. But it's also beautiful and rewarding, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I just had to learn that it's okay to do it my way, even if that doesn't look like what other people expect. One of the most important lessons I've learned through all of this is that you don't have to be perfect to be a good mom. I spent so long trying to live up to this impossible standard, trying to do everything right, and it was killing me. But the truth is, there's no such thing as a perfect mom. We all have our own struggles, our own insecurities, and we're all just doing our best. That's enough. That's what I tell myself now whenever I feel like I'm falling short. My best is enough. Liam is happy, healthy, and loved, and that's what really matters. Jake and I are in a much better place now too. He's been more supportive, and we've been working on being a team again. It hasn't been easy, but we're getting there. He's started to see how much pressure I've been under, and he's been stepping up more to help with Liam and around the house. It's made a big difference in how I feel day to day. I don't feel like I'm carrying the weight of everything on my own anymore. We're in this together, and that's how it should be. As for Sharon, well, she's still Sharon. I don't think she'll ever completely stop offering her unsolicited advice, but I've learned how to handle it better. I don't let her get under my skin the way she used to. I've accepted that she and I are just different people with different ideas about motherhood, and that's okay. I don't need to change her, and she doesn't need to change me. We can coexist, and I can set boundaries when I need to. It's not perfect, but it's working for now. And that's good enough. Looking back, I realize how much I've grown through this experience. I've learned to trust myself more, to set boundaries, and to prioritize my own mental health. I've learned that it's okay to ask for help, and that being a good mom doesn't mean doing everything on your own. Most importantly, I've learned that it's okay to want more for yourself, even as a mom. You don't have to lose your identity just because you have kids. You can still have dreams, goals, and a life outside of motherhood. In fact, I think it makes me a better mom. If there's one thing I'd tell other moms who feel the way I did, it's this: you are enough. Even on the days when you feel like you're failing, you're doing your best, and that's what matters. Don't let anyone, whether it's your MIL, society, or even your own doubts, make you feel like you're not good enough. You are. Being a mom is hard, and it's okay to admit that. It's okay to struggle, but it's also okay to do it your way. You don't have to live up to anyone else's expectations. You just have to love your kids and do your best, and that's more than enough. I'm still figuring things out, and I probably always will be. Motherhood is a journey, and there's no one right path, but I'm finally starting to feel like I'm on the right one for me. I'm finding balance, setting boundaries, and trusting myself more. I'm learning to be okay with the messiness of it all, and that's what feels like progress. It's not perfect, but it's real, and for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.